welcome to today's Health IT Security webcast sponsored by Amazon Web Services, helping healthcare organizations be resilient to disasters and ransomware. I am Vanessa Palmer-Desiato, Project Manager at Xtelligent Healthcare Media and moderator of today's webcast. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Amazon Web Services. AWS is the trusted technology and innovation partner to the global healthcare industry. As the most mature and reliable cloud platform with the broadest and deepest portfolio of healthcare solutions, AWS provides the security and privacy required to enable the highly regulated healthcare industry to increase the pace of innovation, unlock the potential of data, and personalize the healthcare journey. We will begin with a presentation by our speakers and conclude with a question and answer segment. Audience members can submit questions at any time during the webcast using the question tool to the left of the screen. A recording of this webcast will be made available following this presentation. For all technical matters or difficulties, click the help icon at the bottom of the screen. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers. Hector Rodriguez, Executive Security Advisor, Health and Life Sciences at AWS. Andrew Lemke, GTM Sales Leader, Global Security and Resiliency Services at Kyndryl. And Matt Taylor, SVP of Business Development at RedShield Security. Hector, I'll now hand the floor to you.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Let's quickly go through the agenda. We'll begin with a discussion of disasters and resilience, talk about disaster recovery and AWS capabilities, and then I'll hand it off to Andrew to cover resilience, and we'll finish the session with Matt, who'll talk about web application exploit risk reduction. So let's jump right in with a basic definition of what is a disaster. And they're really serious disruptions to the functioning of a community that exceed its capacity to cope using its own resources. And disasters come at us in a couple of forms. They're either natural or they're human-made. And in many cases, what we're seeing today are technological hazards, such as ransomware. And there are everyday concerns that look like disasters. It's not just about ransomware. So we have stolen, lost, vulnerable, misplaced devices, power outages, all the way through the list of software and hardware issues and failures, user errors and lack of training. So people are part of the equation. We've seen disasters through office equipment, heating and ventilation systems, other industrial control systems, and then even single points of failures, which cause service interruptions and, again, different types of outages. But the good news overall, as stated here by the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, is that disasters can and should be prevented. And we can prevent these disasters by being prepared, reducing our risk, and overall becoming more resilient, which is really the key to today's conversation. And resiliency comes at us as the ability to prepare and adapt to changing conditions and really withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. So being more resilient is what you do before a disaster. Disaster recovery, or the ability to recover and restore IT and business operations after a natural or human-made disaster, comes after the disaster. And at AWS, we look at resilience as the combination of addressing both disaster recovery and availability. So we have to plan for response time objectives and response point objectives that suit the workload that we need to manage. But when it comes to availability, we also want to make sure we have high availability, and we have to manage that mean time between failures and that mean time to recovery. And in combination, those give us the ability to be more resilient. And one of the things that's happened in the last few years with ransomware attacks in healthcare is clinicians actually report that the lack of availability and accessibility to their electronic health data, to their mission-critical systems to run the hospital, to provide care, is really the top concern during a disaster. And where is resilience needed? The answer is actually everywhere. We have to start with people resilience and cover data, cybersecurity, devices, physical infrastructure resilience, application resilience, supply chain, and even financial resilience. So this is not a one-sided equation or just looking at resilience in one area. We do have to look at it holistically across the enterprise, and it takes different types of solutions and approaches in many cases, depending on which area we are targeting. So at AWS, we have a few capabilities to address resiliency, to address enterprise resiliency, and it's an area that we continue to invest in and provide additional services and capabilities, and also work with our partners, such as Kyndryl and Redshield, for those types of solutions. We begin with our global infrastructure resilience. Our global infrastructure consists of regions and availability zones around the world that are connected with 100 gigabyte redundant private network, and also enable additional capabilities such as encryption, key management, local zones. So really the ability to keep your data very secure, very protected, very close to your own. And by the way, when you are working in the AWS infrastructure, you choose your regions, you choose your availability zones, you always own your data, you are in control of how this infrastructure works for you. And when we look at the use cases that AWS supports with resilience, we begin with network resilience. So we have a service called AWS Direct Connect, which is all about providing a secure, dedicated network connection from your data centers to the cloud that not only improves application performance, but also improves security or network resilience. For data resilience, we have backup capabilities to create immutable backups and centrally store your data in the AWS cloud. We have an application resilience hub, which automates application resilience testing and enables you to assess and ensure that your configuration based on your RPO, your RTO, meets your requirements. And then we have a disaster recovery solution called Elastic Disaster Recovery Service that enables fast and reliable recovery of on-premise and cloud-based applications. And I'll share this story with you from Calvert Health. This is a recent case study where Calvert Health is leveraging our Elastic Disaster Recovery Service. And the hospital used to have a recovery point objective of 48 hours. And actually, their testing wasn't working. It was coming in at more than 48 hours. And they were really concerned because according to the Ipsos report in 2021, every hour of downtime cost about $46,000. And smaller hospitals, medium hospitals, even large hospitals cannot afford that type of loss. So they implemented the AWS Elastic Disaster Recovery Service for their electronic medical record. With that implementation, they now have a recovery point objective of less than 4 hours. So a 92% improvement overall. And actually in their testing, they are able to recover their electronic medical record application in about 15 minutes. And I'll leave you with this quote from Melissa Hall, the CIO at Calvert Health, where she says that the impact of an electronic health record downtime has on our organization continues to increase exponentially on an annual basis. That means that when clinicians cannot access electronic medical record, their ability to provide care, to provide quality care, is compromised. And with that, I will hand it over to Andrew Lemke.
Okay, thank you, Hector. So my name is Andrew Lemke from Kyndryl, and I'm going to be talking about one of the specific impacts to resilience, which is the cyber attack, and I'll be drilling down and then back up again. So cyber resilience is what we feel is that cyber resilience is an emerging new discipline. There's been a lot of new documentation and publishing coming from NIST, in particular around cyber resilience. And NIST is defining it as the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises on systems that use or are enabled by cyber resources. So this is a recent document from 2019. And again, we're designing really for, cyber resilience is to say, cyber attacks can bring down the availability of our critical mission critical systems. And the reason we're doing this is because of the fact that cyber attack has a potential to, have an impact on patient health, right? And in particular, we'll look at some of the statistics that drive some of this activity. And you'll see here the cybersecurity failure. So this is a piece of data from the World Economic Forum. And you'll see the cybersecurity failure is quite a bit more likely than IT infrastructure breakdown. And because of that, we need to focus a great deal on cybersecurity failure. Most of our organizations, whether healthcare or not, have designed disaster recovery programs and business continuity programs around IT infrastructure breakdown, when in reality, it's cybersecurity failure that is much more likely. And, from a risk perspective, we need to pay attention to all of these types of risks and control them to the degree that we can. And you'll see infectious diseases up here at the top. Of course, we had COVID recently. But we're going to dive specifically into cybersecurity failure. And again, this is what we call cyber resilience, right? And cyber resilience, of course, it has a lot of concern now because of state-sponsored threat actors, right? And what we call advanced persistent threats. And if we are to consider these state sponsors of cyber attacks, then we really need to focus on cyber resilience and be able to complete the core mission despite the fact that we have a threat actor in the environment. We need to design for the fact that we may not even be able to remove a cyber attack from the enterprise. And so we consider it to be a very high bar, right? So cyber resilience, it's not just cybersecurity plus disaster recovery and backups. We need to really think hard about how to achieve resilience despite the fact that threat actors may be in the environment and may not be possible to remove them from the environment, right? So again, the vast majority of our organizations, they have backup, DR, and business continuity designed around technical failures, not around malicious intent, despite the fact the cyber attack is more likely. So we see this as a very high bar, something to really design for, and this can be difficult to do. And so we can, of course, assist and bring great attention to this area, right? So I'll show this quick time frame for a cyber attack. And most of our organizations are very much focused on detection and response. And there's very little attention paid to recovering from cyber attack. And of course, we want to narrow the window by which we detect cyber attacks in the environment. Of course, we want to narrow the time frame around which we respond, but we're focused very much on the end-to-end time frame, including recovery. And so I'll touch on one of the case studies a little later, which describe the recovery phases that we've seen for bad events as well as good case studies as well. But these are our metrics, right? We're measuring the time to detect, we're measuring the time to respond, but very critically, we're adding cyber RTO and cyber RPO. So how do you define your cyber recovery point objective and recovery time objectives? How much time are you willing to be down from a cyber attack, and how much data are you willing to lose from a cyber attack? And if we don't have those metrics, how can we even measure, the ability to succeed on those metrics? And so we bring all of this to bear in our cyber resilience framework. So Kyndryl has been in the resilience space for over 50 years, as we were part of IBM. And so we look across all of these aspects, but with a great focus on recoverability, right? So we are tying together cyber resilience and recovery. And to do that, we can bring assessments, we can bring a great deal of attention to all of these areas. And so let me just touch on a couple of case studies that we have. And so the one of them is a negative case, in which case one of our customers who had not invested in the latest technologies around backup and data storage, over $100 billion company, went and had a ransomware incident which took down their ability to do business, right? And I won't name the business or what type of business, but they were unable to recover quickly. Thousands of servers that had to be recovered from this ransomware attack. They did not have the ability to scan the data for malicious activity, and when recovering from their operations, they did not, check for malware, right? And so we have a very difficult case study in this case. And on the opposite end, we've seen customers in the financial sector that have designed their enterprise around cyber resilience, and they are dynamically shifting workloads in response to threat actors in the environment. They are dynamically performing identity and access management. They're dynamically shifting networks and workloads to actually hide from threat actors in their environment. So we have case studies that are excellent at maturity, and we have case studies that are not so great. So we pay very close attention to many different points of view. I run a practice where we are examining all of these and helping our customers to examine all of the possible things, the state of the art. We pay attention to the analysts as well as the banking sector, as well as what's coming from the US federal government. And we are thought leaders on this area, contributing to articles in DRJ, as well as paying attention to what's happening from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And so we'd love to help out. We'd love to bring more attention to this area. And with that said, I'll give to you, Matt Taylor from Red Shield. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm Matt Taylor from Red Shield. We're a service that offers web application risk reduction on top of AWS's platform. As Hector and Andrew have discussed, when planning for when, not if, is critical, however, part of cyber resilience continues to be risk reduction. Less exposure reduces resilience planning and investment, whilst fewer incidents also reduce cost. But what investment is appropriate? Web applications are clearly just a subset, but let's look at that portion. What does good look like? Where are you at with respect to your peers? How do you weigh up options to optimize your total cost of ownership and return on investment? At a high level, the risk reduction process is the same whether it's cyber or health and safety. Cyber is not as different as many would have you believe, and we believe it is time for cybersecurity to fall in line with normal business practice and be measured in a similar way. That is, first, to find your risks and assess them. Second, treat your risks as high up the stack as possible. Elimination is best. Containment should only be considered when elimination isn't possible. And third, and maybe most importantly, audit and report. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it or even prove it. So ensure that business impact is considered every step of the way. To understand how this fits within a business context and the challenges that you need to resolve, let's examine the ROI. I'll look at the appropriate budget first, our required program components second, and touch on some of the TCO and case for outsourcing third. In assessing available budget, we need to calculate the value we get from risk reduction. Using publicly available data, the expected loss for a 7,500 employee US healthcare company is about $1 million per year. With 50,000 employees, this number only doubles. Then, using the Gordon Loeb University of Maryland optimal prevention calculation, this produces an annual budget of only $400,000 per annum. Now, this may be double or triple that if you consider the impact of other disruptions, but it is still a tight business case, especially given you need to fund other resilience costs discussed today. Now we have an investment envelope, let's review the recent Log4Shell incident to highlight what capabilities need to be funded. Last November, a security issue with Java log function Log4j or Log4j was revealed. If exploited, it gave attackers full system access. Think ransomware, crypto mining, persistent access. Then on the 9th of December, a fairly trivial exploit was made public. The date and publication matter because now governance committees, the judiciary, insurance companies, and the bad guys know about it, so action is required. Well, here is the predetermined playbook we followed for our customers. All of these actions were completed within 24 hours, which is important given we saw exploits ramp up within a 48-hour period. The playbook includes using pre-populated technology inventories to assess what assets were actually at risk. Simultaneously, our researchers examined the exploit methods and developed techniques to eliminate and contain threats. We then tested the controls for both effectiveness and compatibility, as blocking good guys trying to interact with you is also a resilience problem. We then deployed the software objects and containment controls under change management, because change management continues to be a sensible risk reduction tactic that should be adhered to. Then we validated the controls, do what the bad guys do to prove effectiveness. And then finally, we provided assurance reporting to customers throughout so they could meet their governance requirements. Post this deployment, we then monitored bulletin boards and research communities to stay abreast of evasion techniques. We reduced controls for assets that were no longer considered at risk, because protecting an asset from something that is not vulnerable to actually reduces its resilience score. And then we had to continually report and talk about incidents when specific assets were targeted. These sorts of events are knowable, so an operational program with a range of playbooks properly resourced and proactively reducing risk is required. Post-publication is really too late. The battle is already won or lost. RedShield uses a framework based on SANS vulnerability management shown in this chart. The colors represent tools, while the gray is people and process. A key point that I cannot overstress is that the program must consider and minimize any disruption security features may produce to normal transactions. This is the normal reason that security controls are not optimally or speedily deployed. The next point is there are a large number of advanced vendor tools that can assist in the process, but gaining, training, and retaining the skills in required volumes to get the best out of these tools is also required. And then finally, fire drill it again and again. Ensure that you know what happens when the bad guys do their knowable things. Sure, you're still exposed to the unknown actions, but that matters less. In assessing the costs involved in this, typically works out 1/3 equipment, 2/3 people. AI is helping, but we're a long way from being able to say, Alexa, protect my perimeter. For 24/7, you need 6 to 12 operational resources, plus escalation to 24/7 engineers, analysts, and software development teams. Squeezing this into your $400K budget while leaving room for other resilience activities is hard. Hence, this may be a candidate for outsourcing. This is the problem that RedShield identified some 10 years ago. We focus on optimizing this complete process. We produce reusable software objects, plus develop machines and machine learning to augment specialists. This means we can price at approximately 1/30th to 1/10th of DIY for most organizations, and hence give you room to fund your cyber resilience business case. But regardless of whether you outsource or build it yourself, I would implore you to implement a measured program and not rely on the magic tools to do some unmeasured thing. Here's an example of an organization that used this program to deliver tangible results. We've worked with Centara's outsourced web application security partner to assist them in minimizing their risks while undergoing digital transformation. Using Risk Recon, Centara could visibly see the risk reduction RedShield was providing, allowing them to move their assets rapidly and hence deliver enhanced capability and substantial cost reduction. Our process onboards assets, audits them, addresses detected issues with edge compute software fixes, plus implements advanced DOSBot and exploit protection. The testing, change control, monitoring, weekly audits is all run by RedShield, with results available in the portal and summarized in monthly management reporting. This also enabled them to invest further into both cybersecurity and full cyber resilience. I note that Centara has also engaged Kyndryl's services to help them address their complete resilience posture. This is what a measured journey looks like. As we onboard assets, the score increases. Over time, more assets are discovered and the onboarding process continues. So over the last 10 minutes, we have touched on the role of cybersecurity in increasing resilience. I presented a case to treat cybersecurity just like any other risk reduction program, and the value your investments need to be tracked and your TCO optimized along with other resilience investment. Efficiency is required, and outsourcing components is an option that should be considered. I'll pass back to Vanessa now.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your presentation. For more information from our presenters today, we have a number of resources here where you can find more information about their capabilities. We will now move on to the Q&A portion of the webcast. As a reminder, audience members can submit questions using the question tool to the left of the screen. So for the first question, could each of you briefly describe your framework for resilience, and does it cover more than just cybersecurity risks to include risks to facilities, processes, human organizations? How does your framework align to overall business continuity principles and risk management?
I'll start, Vanessa. So what I've done, and again, we're partnering with Kyndryl, with Redshield and others to continue to build out the framework and then leverage additional content. But it really does start with that cybersecurity mind map, even the high level one that I showed, where you have to understand that resilience and enterprise resilience is required everywhere. So you do have to address it at a people level. You have to address it at a cyber level, as Andrew said, and then look at your network. How are you going to protect your network? How are you going to protect your applications and your data? You have to consider supply chain cyber resilience, your financial cyber resilience, and that all becomes part of your business continuity plan.
So this is Andrew, and yes, in fact, our framework does include all of that. We have what's called what we call our 7-layer framework. It starts with strategy and vision. So at the very top, we have executives who need to determine the risk appetite for an organization. We also talk about organization mapping. That's people and how they are, laid out in terms of organizations and where they are physically. We of course need to take into account things like natural disasters, which applies. Then we get into processes, applications, data, IT infrastructure, and facilities. So yes, we do cover this from 7 layers, and cybersecurity is one of the threat models. But I showed the framework that we have earlier, and so absolutely we can discuss all of those.
From Redshield perspective, we use ISO 27K and PCI accredited program based on SANS vulnerability management guidance. As an outsourced service, equipment, people, and process resilience are all inherent. That is actually the point of the service. Technical platform resilience is provided by AWS, and we add the other bits around people and skills and process.
Wonderful. Thank you all. What do you mean by multi-region resilience strategy? How do I get started with a multi-region architecture and application? Isn't it really expensive to have my workloads in 2 cloud regions just for disaster recovery?
So that's a lot of questions all at once for AWS. But first of all, with multi-region resilience strategy, we really mean that a customer chooses to put their workloads in 2 regions. The first region is known as your primary region, and then your second one is your secondary region. Overall, your main traffic is flowing through the primary region, but in case of a disaster, the secondary region is your recovery region, and this makes your infrastructure more resilient and highly available. When it comes to cost, there are different models depending on your recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives. So how much time can you tolerate before you're highly impacted? So you may choose to run a backup type of strategy, or what's called a pilot light, where something is ready to go, but it's not really on, kind of like the pilot light in your stove or your water heater. It's just at a low level. You may choose an active-passive or an active-active configuration, and the cost will change depending on the which model you choose, but that will be aligned with how critical is the application to delivering your mission, to making sure you're able to continue to deliver your capabilities. And then really getting started, it's by following some of the resources that we see on the screen here. There are services, again, from partners like Kyndryl that can help you get started very quickly, from AWS. And also there's a whole blog series from AWS on resiliency planning, resiliency patterns. So resiliency, as Andrew said earlier, is a newer topic, particularly cyber resiliency, but enterprise resiliency. And it's going to take some work. It's going to take researching what's being written by CISA, by Health and Human Services, by other organizations. But really, everybody should start looking at their resiliency plan and not just DR separately or business continuity. It's all, those are all part of your overall resiliency plan.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm hearing about the need for immutable storage and air gapping all the time. What are these about and what do they help with?
So I'd like to take that one. So we've been seeing a great deal of activity in the backup space, right? The market around backing up data, right? And so with regard to malware, if you were to think of ransomware as a subset of that, the ransomware folks who are trying to deny access to our data have learned, of course, that we have backups and enterprises have backups. And so the threat actors here are trying to literally disrupt and destroy data within the backups, right? And so this is impossible if we employ something called immutable storage. So immutable storage is cannot be edited after it's been written, right? So it's write once, read many. And so if we trust the quality of the data, we can write to it once. And typically this has some cost implications, but we can focus in on the absolute crown jewels of an organization and store those to immutable storage. The other one is called air gapping. And so an air gap is basically denying traffic, denying an access point to the storage environment such that, again, threat actors cannot break through and try to corrupt the data, right? And so those are two technical measures. We have many other measures, maybe 30 or 40, that we can bring to bear to bring you into a more cyber resilient posture. But those are two very important ones.
Thank you so much. How does AI and ML play into HCLS data resiliency, security, and data recovery? How close is AI to solving the operational problems that we have running our devices?
I'll jump on that one initially. So look, we see it playing a key role in making effective security affordable. To maximize your effectiveness whilst minimizing your costs requires that you minimize human input. So use ML to get advanced insights into data and recommend action, then automate to deploy, test, document, and backup the appropriate responses. Knitting the two together whilst taking responsibility for compatibility and effectiveness still needs human oversight, however. But the system training is coming along really well. For example, we've been really static on about 63 automated playbooks to respond to reported incompatibility of security controls, whilst our human resource requirements have reduced 9,000%. The human element will still be required for some time, so for the foreseeable future, we think Hollywood's got it right, that cyborg humanity still beats straight robots.
And I want to add to that, Vanessa, because actually what RedShield does is a perfect example of where artificial intelligence and machine learning have been introduced into vulnerability management, the concept of shielding these applications, and also crowdsourcing knowledge by casting the net far and wide across the globe to learn about what types of attacks, what types of vulnerabilities are occurring, and then gathering that data and being data-driven. And for me, data-driven is the key phrase. Organizations, particularly healthcare organizations, have to strive to be more and more data-driven every day in everything they do, but particularly in cybersecurity and cyber resilience and resilience overall. And that data gathering has to continue with the services that you use in the cloud. I mean, AWS's cloud services are all very data-driven, and continue to learn from that, and then use that again to develop new patterns, new innovations to continue to increase your cyber resilience.
Thank you both. If I outsource web application security, what is the most important thing I should demand from my supplier?
Given this is what we do, I'll jump in on that one. So, look, I propose that if you engage a supplier to manage risk, then they should deliver measured risk reduction in an agreed time, cost, and also there's a consequence for failure. So I think holding them to account and actually in listing them and requiring that they deliver outcomes is the thing that I think is most important.
And I think that, Matt, to add to that, one of the things that your organization does really well is giving visibility to the end user, to the customer, through reporting, through the ability for them to access the data, to be part of the solution. So an organization cannot afford to give up their governance and their oversight either, but they've got to make sure they're communicating constantly with that managed service partner and provider, and that they understand exactly what's working, where there's room for improvement, and that they take these reports very seriously, like the risk score report, so that they can continue to increase their risk score and therefore reduce their actual risk.
Thank you. What is the biggest challenge for a CISO in getting a web application security program funded?
I'll jump in again. Look, I think it's the cost and access to skilled human resources. We've sort of discussed that, yes, machine learning, AI is very useful, that tools are great. There's 7,000 different security vendors on the planet. There's lots and lots of really good stuff. But to get outcomes, you really still require skilled humans, and they're very, very scarce. The cost of them is high, but the scarcity is equally difficult for anyone funding a business case. You've got to pay a lot of money for these guys.
I'm going to add to this one too, because this is a really critical topic for me and at the core of what I do. It's, Matt, you mentioned outcomes, but it's taking it and tying it to your business outcomes also and the value to your organization. For healthcare, that's the ability to provide care. And I've seen a number of CISOs now raise the fact that these cybersecurity threats are a patient safety issue. And recently in the UK, there was a report published that ties ransomware incidents to increased mortality rates in healthcare organizations. And that's unfortunate that we're seeing that, but we have to build the business case to support what outcomes we want to drive as a healthcare provider, as a health plan or insurer, as a pharmaceutical organization. And so this isn't just about having the latest and greatest technology or implementing a tool that claims to make you zero trust enabled. It's, are we really solving the bigger issue that the organization has, and are we communicating that properly at the board level, at the executive level, and to all of the stakeholders in the organization?
Thank you. My data backup and disaster recovery strategies were never designed with cyber attacks in mind. What should I do?
Okay, I'd like to take that one. So we've been seeing a tremendous amount of activity with these areas, right? So backup, DR. So in particular with backup, I mentioned it earlier, there was two components that we need to now have in our backup strategies. That was immutable storage and also air gapping, right? And so those are two of several different technologies, but also people and process that need to be brought to bear as well. So, most of our incident response folks in cybersecurity organizations, they don't know how to scan backups for malware. They don't know how to ensure that, malware is not infected in the backups when performing data restorations. And also from our backup teams, and typically in IT shops, they are not aware of how to perform any of this activity, right? So we're seeing a lot of activity around backups and re-engineering those for cyber attack, and simultaneously for disaster recovery. We're now seeing organizations plan DR testing around cybersecurity events, right? And so, you might ask whether your business continuity plan and your disaster recovery plans have actual chapters and sections for cyber attack, and whether you are actually exercising and practicing for these types of scenarios. So a lot of activity there, but in order to get started, we can certainly help. But certainly look into these areas, and we can bring in assessments and other types of services to assist.
I'm glad you mentioned testing, Andrew, because the DoD, the CISA, FBI, and even, again, Health and Human Services have been talking about the lack of tabletop exercises and then working that through an organization. So start with testing. Test your DR strategy using a cyber attack scenario, just like Andrew said. And we have some exercises we've designed at AWS. Again, our partners can do those assessments and those exercises also. But we've been doing them, and it's amazing what organizations are discovering about themselves and how effective just doing these initial tabletop exercises can be to help an organization understand what they need to do more of.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we have time for one more question. What are tangible next steps for me to become educated and engage you to help us?
I think part of it is going to be start with these materials. I'm a reader. I'm always gathering knowledge, but there's some great content in here. But also work with your partners, work with your cloud provider, work with the solution partners that the cloud provider brings to the table. There is a lot of knowledge here. There is no need to start at zero. There's no need to completely do this on your own or try and build it on your own. Today, the world is data-driven. By the way, cyber attackers are data-driven. They also are collaborating, and that's the way they work. And we have to get smarter together in that way. But overall, your partners are a critical part of what you do in your organization, and understanding how they work, understanding how they put in their protections and their capabilities are a key component of what you have to do. So it is, again, going back to these materials, working with your solution providers, your partners to build out that ecosystem, and then get a resilience plan all in one place, because it's not one tool or one software application for every workload, but it is going to have to come together as the sum of the parts so that you can see your overall resilience plan in one place.
Yeah, I'd echo what Hector's been saying. I do have another resource I just want to highlight, which is for us, we also have a no resources, no obligation free trial that can give you a snapshot of the risks on your perimeter and the sort of risk reduction you can expect from our service. So that's a plug for our free trial service.
Yeah, and myself as well. So Kyndryl has been in the resilience space for 50 years, right? We've been doing this while we were with IBM, and of course Kyndryl is the recent spinoff. But we've got great amounts of expertise on cyber resilience. We are the thought leaders on cyber resilience, and of course we can help out. We'd love to be your partners, and we can do a lightweight assessment, 3 to 4 hours in a quick workshop, and give you a plan to get to a mature state.
And I actually want to thank Matt and Andrew for stating that, because I run this project called Helping Healthcare or Helping Hospitals, and part of it, as the industry has come under attack, part of what we were trying to do at AWS and continue to do is help organizations adapt more of these modern solutions. And so by providing some of these no-cost services and trials, it's a great way to get them started to also fail fast so you can succeed faster, and not having to spin up the infrastructure on-prem, just leveraging these cloud services is a great way to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That concludes today's Health IT Security presentation. Special thanks to our speakers, Hector, Andrew, and Matt, our audience, and our sponsor, AWS. Thank you all, and goodbye.